Hey everyone, really excited, and it seems like this semester is moving fast, because, we're starting on the Crucible really early. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that everything in the slideshow has already been pared down, so yes, you need all of this in your notes. It's not extremely long, and it's interesting, but I do need you to know that there's some concepts in here that can be confusing, so please pay attention. Alright, first we need to know about the author. The author is Arthur Miller. He's a playwright. He did some screen adaptations, but mostly he was a stage playwright. He was extremely popular during his time when he was at the height of his career, because he portrayed the working class realistically. After World War II, people wanted to see, plays and television about real, everyday working class people. He did go to the University of Michigan in 1934, and his parents were Jewish immigrants. He was Jewish. His most famous play is Death of a Salesman. However, The Crucible is a close second. The fact that he's Jewish is really interesting because he gets accused of being a communist right after World War II, and if you can remember what happened during World War II with Jews and the communists and the Nazis, things just necessarily didn't go all that well between them. So it was kind of ironic that he was accused of communism. He started having trouble as a public figure in 1950. He said some things that made the government nervous. At this time, we're at the height of the Cold War is really just starting to kick off. And everybody's nervous. People are spotting communists in their soup. So, he says some things that make people wonder whether he is communist or not. Then, in 1953, the Crucible opens up, and it's a parallel between the Salem witch trials and the Communist Red Scare. The Communist Red Scare is basically just where people were accusing anybody and everybody of being a communist. Because of the parallel, and because it was a criticism of the Communist Red Scare, it actually made Miller more of a suspect. After all this, in 1956, he does get called to testify in front of the House Committee of Un-American Activities. Basically, this is a televised court hearing. It's the very first televised court hearing of its kind. You would sit in front of a panel of people with a microphone and a camera pointing at your face, and they would ask you questions as to they would ask you questions that would supposedly determine whether or not you were a communist. And then they would want you to give names of other communist sympathizers. Arthur Miller refused to cooperate. He refused to give any communist names. And basically, if you were ever accused by this committee, if you were accused and you were not really cleared, then you were considered a communist, but you were like a closet communist, and your reputation was ruined. The way that I always explain this is, if I am a business owner, and my employee has worked for me for 10 years, and that employee has only missed one day in 10 years, shows up on time, does what he's supposed to do, does more than I ask him to, and then he's accused of being a communist. I'm going to have to go to that employee and say, I'm sorry, you've been a great employee, but I can't employ a communist. That same employee that was just fired is going to go home to where he rents a house, and his landlord's going to be waiting there and saying, you've never missed a rent payment, the house is in perfect order, you don't cause me any trouble, but I'm going to have to kick you out because I can't rent to communists. So all of a sudden, this person is homeless and jobless, all because he was accused of something. Now, the problem here is people would start accusing their neighbors or their coworkers for personal gain. Now, this is all later overturned, but the damage has been done to Miller's reputation. There's no real going back from it, and he never regains his popularity. Some interesting facts about Miller. He married Marilyn Monroe. We all know who she is. And they were very unhappy together. Marilyn Monroe had some bats in her belfry. I mean, she was kind of crazy. And they were just constantly unhappy. Then he married Inge, and they had 2 children. He does write some more plays and short stories, and he dies at the age of 89 in 2005. Now, why would all this cause Arthur Miller to write about the Puritans? Well, the basic answer is, if you were accused of being a communist, you were always accused. So, once accused, always accused. Well, that's the exact same thing about the Salem witch trials and the Puritans. Once they accused you of being a witch, then you were always accused of being a witch, whether you were acquitted or not. Okay? I mean, there really was no getting out of it. They would do horrible things to these people, mostly women, who were accused of witchcraft. They would, dunk them in water, and if they drowned, they were not a witch, but if they didn't drown, they were a witch. And then they were going to kill them anyway. They would tie them to a stake and set them on fire, and if they burned, they were a person. And if they didn't burn, they were a witch. I mean, the thought process here is crazy. Either way, you're going to die. So again, it's once accused, always accused. Now, as a recap for Puritanism, it originated in England. We need to remember that it all goes with predestination. They do flee England to avoid religious persecution. They have extremely radical beliefs about religion. If you remember, I said if it looks like fun and it smells like fun, then it's probably considered fun, and therefore it's a sin in the eyes of Puritans. And although they fled religious persecution, they became persecutors themselves. They didn't really tolerate any difference either, which is what led to the witch trials. Alright, in 1680, they come in and they settle Plymouth in 1620, and then the Puritans go out and they settle New Jerusalem, or Salem, in 1626. Now, in 1626, they come up with these rules so that the society can function. All because they're seeking religious persecution. They consider themselves God's chosen people, which is why they named it New Jerusalem, because it said in the Bible, the third coming of Jerusalem will usher the second coming of the Messiah. And it's a little cocky why they named, their town New Jerusalem. And if you know anything about the Bible, then you know that the Israelites are God's chosen people. Anywho, in 1680, the town is more settled, and all of those strict rules that they have in the beginning to make sure everything functions, now it's not working. Your rules have to change as society changes. The best way to explain this is, when I was in high school, Mr. Barron taught me 9th grade history, world history. And back then, you weren't allowed to have your cell phone in school. And he just saw mine one day and took it. And we didn't get him back. My mama had to come up here, and my mom was the teacher, and that's pretty much the only reason I got mine back. But now you're allowed to have them at school as long as you use them the way teachers ask you to use them. So the rules have changed. They've evolved with society. That's the problem here. Rules are not changing. They are not evolving. Again, with the name of New Jerusalem, the real Jerusalem, had been destroyed twice, and they said that the third coming was supposed to signal the second coming of the Messiah. They wanted to usher in the final kingdom of God. They considered themselves to be God's chosen people. Again, very cocky. I mean, Anywho. Witchcraft. The Puritans took the Bible at its word. Now, depending on what you believe and how you believe, you can choose to take the Bible at its word or not. But it does mention witches. It also mentions dragons. Okay? But Puritans believed in witches and witchcraft because the Bible talked about witches and witchcraft. Witchcraft here is not the same kind of this is not Harry Potter witchcraft. Witchcraft here is when you enter into a deal with the devil to do evil things. Basically, you would make a contract with the devil, and then you would go and harass somebody you didn't like, okay? Or you would just do horrible things to the community. It's a sin, and it's a crime, and the crime is punishable by death. Accusations are taken extremely seriously. They're investigated. A lot of times they would burn people at the stake. Some people, they would put you sometimes in this chair, and they would tie your arms and your legs to the chair. And the chair was on the end of a fulcrum, and they would dunk you over and over again into the river. And then they would dunk you underwater, pull you up, say, "Are you a witch?" If you said no, you'd go back down. And they would do that over and over again until you confessed. And even if you confessed, you were going to be in a mess, because then they were going to do something to you to purge you of that evilness. In Salem, 1692, there are some girls who are diagnosed as being afflicted by the devil and witchcraft. These girls really do exist. However, they're not as young as they are in the book. In real life, they're in their late 20s. In the book, they're in their teens. Now, here's where you really need to pay attention, because I know we're jumping time frames again. We've been to the 50s, then we were in the 1600s, now we're back in the 50s. The Second Red Scare is during the 40s and 50s. This is right after World War II. The Americans are concerned about communism, and they're concerned that it's growing in Eastern Europe and China, which is, the USSR at the time, and China. There is a Communist Party in the United States. It's organized labor unions that oppose fascism, and it had about 75,000 members. So it did have, a pretty good following. And it was all during the Cold War when everything starts to get muddled. During World War II, at the beginning of World War II, the USSR, or the Soviet Union, are allied with Germany and the Nazi Party. Then in the middle of World War II, they swap sides, and they become allies with the United States to fight Germany. And the United States and the Soviet Union all of a sudden are real buddy-buddy. They're good and happy about that. But Americans aren't concerned with communism at the time, because they're too worried about the Nazi Party and what Hitler's doing in Germany. After World War II, the Soviet Union did exactly what it said it was not going to do, and it expanded its territory. And this is when everybody starts thinking more along the lines of, oh no, we've gotten into bed with the devil, and now we've got to fight communism. We're at odds with Russia again. Then after this, America's got the first atomic bomb. But the USSR comes up with their own atomic bomb in 1949 after, the Americans dropped the bombs in Hiroshima and Iwo Jima in 1945. Then Mao Zedong is a communist. He took control of China. And then in 1950, the Korean War begins. And that is like North Korea, which is still communist, and South Korea, which is democratic. They're fighting against one another. This is where the communist trials come in, the House of Un-American Activities and all that. You've got McCarthyism. You need to know that. It's called McCarthyism. Joseph Raymond McCarthy began all these trials from the 1950s. Basically, he claimed that the State Department had been infiltrated by communists. He claimed to have this list of communists, but he never had, any credible sources or any legitimate evidence. He created these highly publicized, televised hearings. It was basically of a bunch of people who had any kind of influence. It made him very popular for a time. And he was very well respected. You've got people who they're banning movies, they're banning books. Careers and lives of the accused are ruined. It'd be like right now if one of you accused me of being a communist and Miss Warnick had to come in and tell me that she couldn't have a communist teaching all of you, and then you get rid of me. His powers do dwindle because, you can accuse a lot of people, but there are just some people you shouldn't mess with. And the army is a body of people that you just should not mess with. So the Secretary of the Army, he accuses the Secretary of the Army for concealing foreign espionage. He accused the Army of having a communist spy ring, basically. The Secretary of the Army brings in boxes upon boxes upon boxes of files, says this is not a secret. Everybody knows what's going on. This is common knowledge. I have all the paperwork right here stating that I've done everything I'm supposed to do. And then in December 2nd, 1954, McCarthy loses all of his power and was censured by Congress because of the disruptions and accusations. And none of his accusations are taken seriously anymore. They go back and apologize to many people. Unfortunately, the damage is done. To be censured by Congress means that every time he's supposed to be televised, he's not televised. Every time he says something, they remove it, okay? The Crucible focused on the fact that if you were once accused, you were always going to be accused, and you had little or no chance of clearing your name. The reasoning of the courts and the public are irrational and circular. Tomorrow, probably not tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow, I will draw this image. So leave a space here that's maybe 3 or 4 inches long, so that you'll be able to enter a drawing there, so that it makes sense. Alright, dramatic license. There are all kinds of plays. Some of them are called history plays. Some of the most popular history plays are those done by William Shakespeare. He does the King Henry plays. But they're supposed to be historical and accurate. Arthur Miller did do his research on the Salem witch trials, and he wanted to get it right, but it wasn't intended to be a history play. It was supposed to be a play criticizing the government at the time. However, he was careful not to misrepresent the characters or their actions. He does make some changes to make it more interesting. It's just like when you read a book and then you go and watch the movie. It's going to be different. And for one of the things he did is he changed the ages. He made the girls much younger. And then he also added in some affairs and some relationships where there really had not been any. In fact, there's no proof there had been any. Okay, I need you to understand that while this text is about the Puritans. It is not a Puritan text. Like, if you have to add one more note, add what I just said. This is about Puritans, but not a Puritan text. It's about the same ideas, but it's not a Puritan text. Okay? So please remember that. We'll be going... We may get our own copies, or we may just use the one in the book. I'm not really sure yet. However, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I hope you've enjoyed it.